You made a decision today without thinking about it. Maybe you walked into a room and something felt off. Maybe you met someone new, and before they said a word, part of you had already decided not to trust them. You didn't reason your way there. You just knew. You called it a gut feeling, and you meant it as a figure of speech. But the real answer is far stranger than a figure of speech, because that feeling didn't come from your head. It came from an actual nervous system, a second brain, and it lives in your stomach. Let that sit for a second. You have been taught your whole life that thinking happens in one place, behind your eyes, inside your skull, a single command center running the show, sending orders down to the rest of the body, like a general barking at soldiers. Your heart beats because the brain says so. Your hand moves because the brain says so. Everything flows downward from that one gray organ at the top. That story is wrong. Coiled inside the walls of your gut, wrapped around 9 meters of tubing that runs from your throat to your bottom, there is a web of nerve cells so dense and so independent that scientists gave it its own name. They call it the enteric nervous system. And the man who spent 30 years mapping it, a researcher at Columbia University named Michael Gershon, gave it a name that stuck harder. He called it the second brain. He wasn't being poetic, he was being literal. Your gut contains roughly 100 million neurons. That is more nerve cells than you have in your entire spinal cord. More than in the whole of your peripheral nervous system outside the gut itself. It is a genuine brain by every structural measure that matters. It has its own reflexes, its own senses, its own memory of a kind. And here is the part that should stop you cold. It can run without you. If a surgeon cut the vagus nerve, the great cable that connects your head brain to your gut brain, your digestion would not stop. Your intestines would keep sensing, keep deciding, keep pushing food along in their slow rhythmic waves completely on their own. No other organ in your body can do that. Cut the nerve to your heart and things go wrong fast. Cut the nerve to your gut and the gut simply shrugs and carries on. It doesn't need instructions from above. It never really did. So why do you have a brain in your belly? To answer that, you have to go backward. Not thousands of years, not millions. You have to go back to the very beginning of animals with guts at all. The first creatures complex enough to have a body cavity were essentially tubes. A mouth at one end, an opening at the other, and in between, the urgent business of turning the outside world into fuel. These animals had no head to speak of, no cortex, no thoughts. What they had was a tube that needed to know things. Is there food here? Is this safe to absorb? Is something poisonous inside me right now that I need to expel? That tube grew nerves to answer those questions. And those nerves came first. The brain in your skull is, in evolutionary terms, the newcomer. The gut was thinking about survival long before your ancestors had a face. When your embryo was forming in the womb, the tissue that would become your brain and the tissue that would become your gut nervous system started from the very same origin, then split and traveled to opposite ends of you. You were built with two brains from the beginning. One rose up and learned language and math and regret. The other stayed home and kept you alive. Now, here is where it gets uncomfortable. That cable between them, the vagus nerve, its name comes from the Latin word for wandering, because it drifts through your whole torso, touching everything. You would assume it exists so your head can command your gut, so the smart brain can tell the dumb one what to do. It's the opposite. Around 80 to 90% of the fibers in the vagus nerve carry signals in one direction only, upward, from the gut to the brain. Your belly is not sitting quietly waiting for orders. It is talking constantly, and your head is mostly listening. 9 messages travel up for everyone that travels down. The organ you were taught to ignore is doing most of the talking in the most important conversation in your body. What is it saying? That question is where the field cracked wide open. Because it turns out your gut is not talking alone. It has help, roommates, trillions of them. Living inside your intestines right now is a teeming civilization of bacteria. so numerous that their cells rival the number of your own. This is your microbiome. For most of history, we assumed they were just passengers, harmless little things helping to break down lunch. Then a neuroscientist in Ireland named John Cryan, working at University College Cork with his colleague Ted Denan, ran a series of experiments that turned the assumption inside out. Cryan raised mice in complete sterility, germ-free, no bacteria in their guts at all. And those mice grew up wrong. Not physically, behaviorally. They struggled to recognize other mice. Their memory faltered. Their stress responses were miscalibrated. Something was missing from their minds, and the thing that was missing lived in their bellies. Then Cryan did the reverse. He took normal mice, stressed them, and fed some of them a specific strain of bacteria, a lactobacillus. The fed mice stayed calmer. Their stress hormones dropped, their behavior softened. A living organism in the gut had reached up and changed how the brain handled fear. And when the researchers cut the vagus nerve, the effect vanished. Sit with what that means. A bacterium, a single-celled thing with no brain of its own, was sending a message up that wandering nerve. And the message was landing in the emotional machinery of a mammal. And it was working. Cryan coined a word for compounds that do this. He called them psychobiotics, bugs that alter the mind. Why would your bacteria care about your mood? Cryan's answer is chilling in its simplicity. Your microbes need you to be social. A lonely animal that never contacts others is a dead end for a bacterium. But a friendly animal, one that huddles and grooms and shares, is a highway. Every hug, every handshake, every shared meal is a chance for those microbes to spread into a new host. So it may be in their interest to nudge you toward connection, to make you want company. Some of the sociability you feel like a moral choice may be, in part, a colony of bacteria voting for its own future. There is a chemical at the center of all this, and you already know its name. Serotonin. The molecule everyone associates with happiness, the one that antidepressants are built around. You picture it as a brain chemical floating between the neurons behind your eyes. But about 90% of the serotonin in your entire body is not made in your brain. It is made in your gut. Specialized cells lining your intestine, enterochromaffin cells, are the largest serotonin factory you own. The chemistry we most associate with joy is manufactured overwhelmingly in your digestive tract. Now, this doesn't work the simple way the internet likes to claim. The serotonin in your gut doesn't just float up and drench your brain. Your brain makes its own. But the gut's serotonin activates those vagal nerve endings, and the signal it sends travels up into the regions of the brain that govern mood and stress. The factory and the mood are wired together, even if the chemical itself stays below the neck. So when your stomach is in knots before you walk on stage, that is not a metaphor. That is your second brain flooding a nerve with signals, and your first brain feeling the wave arrive. Here is a question you have never asked yourself. When you are anxious, which brain started it? You have always assumed the fear begins upstairs. You see a threat, your head panics, and the panic rolls down into a churning stomach. Cause, then effect, brain, then gut. But the research keeps finding the arrow pointing the other way. Disrupt an animal's gut bacteria and its brain becomes more anxious. Transplant the gut microbes of an anxious, depressed animal into a calm one, and the calm one starts to behave as though it too is suffering. The mood traveled with the microbes. It rode up the nerve. The feeling was manufactured downstairs and delivered up. You are not always the author of your own dread. Sometimes you're only its audience. This is not fringe science anymore. Researchers found that the same protein tangles that mark Alzheimer's disease in the brain also show up in the nerves of the gut. Some scientists now suspect that certain neurodegenerative diseases may begin in the belly and climb, over years, up the vagus nerve into the skull. The illnesses we thought of as diseases of the mind may, in some cases, start as diseases of the gut. That thread is still being pulled, but the fact that it exists at all rewrites the map. So what do you do with this? You start by taking the feelings seriously. That instinct in your stomach, the one that flinched before you understood why, is not noise. It is the output of 100 million neurons and a trillion microbes that have been running risk assessments since before your species had a name. It is often wrong. It is not always to be obeyed. But it is not nothing. It is the oldest processor you own, reporting in. And you feed it, whether you mean to or not. Every meal is a message to the colony. The fiber you eat or don't, the fermented foods or their absence, the stress you carry, which changes the chemistry of the whole system. You are not just fueling a body, you are shaping the population of a second mind, and that mind is talking back to the first one all day long. You made a decision today without thinking about it. You felt something in your gut, and you called it a figure of speech. It wasn't. There was a brain down there. There always has been. Older than your thoughts, wired straight into your moods, run in part by creatures that are not even you. It was speaking the whole time, in the only language it has ever had. The strange part isn't that your gut has feelings. The strange part is how long you spent believing they were coming from your head.